Benaiah predicted to Solomon that Messiah's reign would be one of peace in contrast to the bloodshed wrought by his father's enemies.
Their blood shall forever return upon the head of Joab, and upon the head of his descendants forever. But upon David and his descendants, upon his house and his throne, there shall be peace forever from Yahweh. The king said, moreover, to Shimei, You know, as your heart acknowledges, all the wickedness that you did to my father David. Therefore Yahweh will return your wickedness on your own head. But King Solomon shall be blessed, and the throne of David shall be established before Yahweh forever. 1 Kings 2:33, 44, and 45.
The first-century Jews who longed for a warrior prince, Messiah, to rid them of the Roman scourge, as Bar Kokhba tried to do 100 years later, should have read this passage. Once Yeshua has taken the throne of Israel, his will be a reign of peace. The length of Messiah's reign, described here as forever, was restated in dozens of places, such as Psalm 89, verses 3 to 4.
I have made a covenant with my chosen. I have sworn to my servant David, Your seed I will establish forever, and build up your throne to all generations.
Or,
For thus says Yahweh, David shall never lack a man to sit on the throne of the house of Yisrael. Jeremiah 33:17.
Daniel was no doubt quite familiar with the writings of the prophet Isaiah, who lived about 150 years before his time. Isaiah's messianic revelations went well beyond lineage and length of reign. They delved into the very personality of the Holy One.
Behold, my servant whom I uphold, my elect one in whom my soul delights. I have put my Spirit upon him. He will bring forth justice to the Gentiles. He will not cry out, nor raise his voice, nor cause his voice to be heard in the street. A bruised reed he will not break, and a smoking flax he will not quench. He will bring forth justice for truth. He will not fail, nor be discouraged, till he has established uprightness in the earth, and the coastlands shall wait for his law. Isaiah 42, 1 through 4.
Here is a picture of a gentle, quiet man, one who didn't have to file an environmental impact report every time he opened his mouth. He would nonetheless succeed in bringing justice to the whole world, especially to the Gentiles. The Jews, presuming this would entail harsh punishments for their oppressors, probably liked that line a lot. They failed to realize that justice for the Gentiles included mercy for those who turned to God, believing in and accepting Yahshua's offer of redemption. This explains why so many Jews had trouble with the concept of Gentiles in the congregation of Yahweh. Isaiah, speaking for the Messiah, went on to say,
The Spirit of Yahweh is upon me, because Yahweh has anointed me to preach the good news, the good tidings to the poor. He has sent me to heal the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives, and the opening of the prison to those who are bound, to proclaim the acceptable year of Yahweh, the Jubilee, and the day of vengeance of our God, to comfort all who mourn, to console those who mourn in Zion, to give them beauty for ashes, the oil of joy for mourning, the garment of praise for the spirit of heaviness, that they may be called trees of uprightness, the planting of Yahweh, that he may be glorified. Isaiah 61, 1 through 3.
Here is a picture of the Anointed One, filled with God's Spirit, offering salvation and healing to the poor in spirit, replacing all the bad things in their lives with wonderful gifts from the hand of God. But in the same breath, he warns of a coming day of judgment, and it's the same person dishing out the comfort and the vengeance. If you'll recall, Yahshua applied this prophecy to his own first-century advent, but he cut off the text at
the acceptable year of Yahweh, the Yobel.
Everything else, beginning with vengeance, is on our horizon. For sheer prophetic clarity, you can't beat Isaiah's sweeping description of the Messiah.
Unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and the government will be upon his shoulder. And his name will be called Wonderful, Counselor,
or Wonderful Counselor,
Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace, also Patron of Redemption. Of the increase of his government and peace, or restoration, there will be no end upon the throne of David and over his kingdom, to order it and establish it with judgment and justice, uprightness, from that time forward, even forever. The zeal of Yahweh of hosts will perform this. Literally it says, the zeal of Yahweh of hosts will perform this as Ish Haya El. Ish is man, Haya is exists, and El is God. Therefore, the zeal of Yahweh of hosts will perform this as God existing as man. Isaiah 9, 6-7.
Notwithstanding the usual disconcerting prophetic convention of lumping widely separated manifestations into the same sentence, this is without doubt the most significant messianic prophecy in the entire Bible. First, it confirms that he will be human, born into the world as a child, a son, and a physical heir to the throne of David. For all practical purposes, the first century advent of this prophecy ends there. No one has ever been able to demonstrate his royal lineage since the temple's genealogical records were destroyed in 70 A.D., and no one other than Yahshua of Nazareth has ever emerged as a plausible candidate for the job. Never mind Bar Kokhba and a plethora of others who gathered followers to themselves for a short time. Yahshua has no qualified historical rivals. If there were any, the skeptics would have found them by now. The yet-to-be-fulfilled part is where Isaiah's prophecy really gets interesting. Daniel's understanding of who Messiah would be had to have been shaped by this passage. We could surmise that his being called Wonderful Counselor and Prince of Peace, or Patron of Redemption, as well as his role as the eternal king reigning upon David's throne, were all confirmations of earlier revelations. But when Isaiah states that he will be Mighty God and Everlasting Father, and in the same breath says that he will come as a child, we have a whole new paradigm. Though Messiah's deity becomes somewhat more apparent through Yahweh's choice of words in the original Hebrew text, this is Emmanuel, God with us. Remember Daniel 9:24?
70 weeks are determined for your people, and for your set-apart city, to finish the transgression, to make an end of sins, and to make reconciliation for iniquity, to bring in everlasting uprightness, to seal up vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most set apart.
The only way any of this could happen would be for God himself to enter human history. He did, and he will again. Finishing the job will take only 7 more years. We now have a pretty good idea of God's timetable for the Jews. 69 weeks down, 1 week to go. But what does he have in mind for the Gentiles, who, after all, comprise 99.8% of the world's population? As it turns out, Daniel was shown the broad sweep of Gentile progress as well. Much of what he was shown is now history, prophecies that proved so detailed and accurate that armies of liberal scholars felt compelled to label his book a fraud. Though they're a fascinating study, most are beyond the scope of this book, but some of his revelations spill over into events and situations yet future to us. When we speak of the times of the Gentiles, Gentiles, it should be understood that the Bible does not concern itself with all of human history, but only that portion of it that bears directly upon the unfolding of God's plan of redemption. For all practical purposes, that means restricting the revelations to events that affect the Jews, Yahweh's chosen vehicle for our salvation. Thus, what happened, or what will happen, in East Asia or South America has little bearing on the subject. It's not that God doesn't know or care about Japan. It's just that the Japanese don't play a pivotal role in this particular human drama. By the same token, nations and peoples who interacted with the Jews received a lot more biblical press than their intrinsic significance might indicate. Who cares what the Babylonians, Canaanites, or Moabites did anyway? Yahweh does, because their influence compromised the Jews' relationship with Him. As we look at Daniel's visions of the Gentile kingdoms, then, bear in mind that the nations he saw all conquered and occupied Jerusalem, each in its turn. Daniel's first brush with the times of the Gentiles was a little bumpy. It all started when Arioch, captain of Nebuchadnezzar's guard, came to him and announced, "Sorry, kid, you're one of the king's wise men, so I've got to kill you." "Excuse me?" "Yeah, the king had this dream, and nobody could tell him what it was all about, so I'm supposed to chop you up in little pieces and burn your house down. No offense." "None taken, but what was that part about a dream? My God knows all about this stuff, Ari. Shoot, he probably gave him the dream in the first place. Give me a couple of days and I'll ask him." Okay, that's a paraphrase. This whole story's in Daniel chapter 2. We'll pick up the narrative where young Daniel is making his subsequent appearance before the most powerful man on earth.
The king answered and said to Daniel, whose
Babylonian
name was Belteshazzar, "Are you able to make known to me the dream which I have seen, and its interpretation?" Daniel answered in the presence of the king and said, "The secret which the king has demanded, the wise men, the astrologers, the magicians, and the soothsayers cannot declare to the king. But there is a God in heaven who reveals secrets, and he has made known to the king Nebuchadnezzar what will be in the latter days. Your dream and the visions of your head upon your bed were these. You, O king, were watching, and behold, a great image. This great image, whose splendor was excellent, stood before you, and its form was awesome. This image's head was of fine gold, its chest and arms of silver, its belly and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of clay. You watched while a stone was cut out without hands, which struck the image on its feet of iron and clay, and broke them to pieces. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold were crushed together, and became like chaff from the summer threshing floors. The wind carried them away, so that no trace of them was found. And the stone that struck the image became a great mountain, and filled the whole earth. Daniel 2:26 through 28, 31 through 35.
We aren't told if the king couldn't remember the dream, or was merely being wiser than his wise men. I suspect it was the latter. After all, anybody can come up with an interpretation for a dream, even one as weird as this, but it can really be hard to verify his assessment. Seeing the contents of another man's dreams, however, requires some divine help, which Daniel had and Nebuchadnezzar needed.